Well, thank you for that kind introduction, and I'm very happy to be at Cornell today. Yeah, the weather was interesting. Around Buffalo is blowing pretty hard, and I thought, man, if it's like this all the way to Ithaca, I'm going to be late. But luckily, it cleared up, and there was no issues getting here. So, yeah, just here to talk to you, and I'm impressed by the crowd. I understand it's reading week, so it's good that you guys maybe you're all working, trying to catch up on things. But my talk today is about 30 minutes or 35 minutes, and then there's, I think, some time for questions. And really, I think that what I'm, as the president of the company, trying to do as much as possible is kind of the outreach and educating about our work in Arctic apples. So anyway, let's get started. We are a small company, kind of unique in the fact that we're doing what we're doing. Biotech, ag biotech is largely being dominated by multinationals. So we're a company of 7 located in Summerland, British Columbia. Our labs are in Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. For those who don't know where that is, that's out in the middle of the Canadian prairie. And if you think it's cold and wintry here, just go give that a try someday. It's really darn cold out there. But we have our greenhouse and screenhouse operations in Summerland, where it's quite a bit warmer, and then our field trials in Washington and New York State. So we have a very young staff, other than me and Jen, I guess, our marketing director, research manager, and field staff and our technicians and stuff, lab staff are all young, dynamic individuals, really motivated to develop biotech and use biotech as into product development. Another thing that makes us unique is we have many of our shareholders in our small little company are tree fruit growers. So we have about 45 shareholders, and more than half of those are growers. And so when people say, growers aren't interested in this technology, well, I think we're an example where that's not true. Growers are interested in this because they're funding this company's business. Anyway, we also have many collaborations around the world, and we actually do have some dealings with Cornell today, and we've had some lab activities that we did with them several years ago. So what are we talking about? We're talking today about our Arctic apples, and this is an apple that has been genetically engineered to not go brown. So we've turned off the polyphenol oxidase enzyme, or the family of polyphenol oxidase genes in the Arctic apple, and so the surfaces and bruises and juice don't brown. And this is our flagship project. A lot of people think that this is a new variety. Arctic apple is a new, like Gala, Fuji, whatever else, but that's not the case. It's a new trait that can go into any apple variety. We've chosen to work with a sort of a sweet and a tart apple initially from a regulatory point of view. So that's the Arctic Golden and Arctic Granny, their parentage of them being, of course, Golden Delicious and Granny Smith. But we've also done the sort of Arcticized a Gala, 2 strains of Gala and 2 strains of Fuji, and we continue to work on others. So any apple variety can be made non-browning and would go under the Arctic brand name. So this is in our field trial in Washington State, and I think that as a fruit grower, a person who spends most of his life working with apples, cherry trees, we're pretty happy to say they grow exactly like their parent. We can't see any change, and of course that's what we have to prove in the regulatory process, that an Arctic apple tree will grow and behave just like its parent. And in fact, the yields and performance of our field trials have been outstanding. So the first 2 varieties that I spoke of would be the Golden and the Granny, and here's an example of a control Golden. On the left-hand side there you have their Goldens, the control being that nice mushy brown one, and the Arctic being the one next to it, and the same with the Grannies. So those were where we have a bruise test that we do, where we drop a weight from a certain distance and it smashes the apple, and then we wait a certain amount of time and slice across the bruise, and that's kind of an example of the difference you have. So what people would ask why we're doing this, and well, I think that we're doing this to increase apple consumption. As a fruit grower, I've watched apple consumption decline for the last 25 years on a per person basis, and that's not a really very good news if you're trying to sell apples into a declining market. And where overall fruit and vegetable consumption has been increasing. So what you see is there's a lot of competition out there. Consumers make their choices, and they've been choosing not to buy apples. And so how can we make them eat more apples? That's really the question. What can we use as a driver to increase apple consumption? So this next slide just kind of reinforces the same message. You know, that blue line is your total apple production. It's been it's actually been declining slightly. Certainly the area, the acreage-wise, has been declining dramatically, but the productivity has gone up. So it's kind of a flat trend line. Consumption-wise has been a very flat trend line, maybe slightly up over the last few years. There's been a lot of effort by FDA and USDA to promote fruit and vegetable consumption, and that's helped a little bit, but overall, you know, the market trends are very unexciting and not really showing that the apple business is where you want to put your money. We like to use this as a model, as a comparison. In 1988, fresh cut carrots came on the market, and these are all, you know, these carrots that were cut and tumbled and put in a bag. And in 1988, they were slimy and pretty awful, but they did figure out the problems, and they got that worked out. And you can see that by making carrots a more convenient food, it stopped from being put in soup and stews to something that people ate, snacked out at their desk, worked at, put out, you know, for snacks at lunch, and changed the business completely. And if you go to the grocery store today, you'll see carrots, you know, in wedges and curly cues and sliced, you know, and all sorts of shredded carrots. There's more choices of carrots today than you ever could imagine. And I guess that's really what we're trying to do with a non-browning apple, is give the opportunity to increase consumption by making apples more convenient to eat and put them to different usages. So just to look at the apple business today in the US, you can see that 68% of the business goes to fresh apple consumption. So this is the whole apple going out to the retail store and picking it up, and you know, it comes in its nice little perfect package. It's good skin on it, it's handy to handle, toss it in your lunch bag. And then 32% is processed, and of that processed product, you've got juice and canned, you know, the sauces, I guess, being the big part of it, and then you've got slices and dried and frozen. The slice business at 2% is being where the biggest growth has happened. You know, it's about 10 million boxes of apples sliced. And you may know them from McDonald's where you get your dippers, but you see them in the produce section and the refrigerated fresh cut section nowadays, and it's become a reasonably popular product, but I think that success at retail has been limited by its higher price and compared to other fresh cut snacks. The interesting thing to me is that the dried market is almost as big as fresh slices, and something you may not know that is that a lot of apple slices get dried, and then if you go to, let's say you go to the deli section in a grocery store and they've got, you know, fresh store cooked apple pies. Well, that store will have bought the pie filling as a dehydrated product and ready to go, and they'll hydrate it and then put it into the pie shell and cook it there, because shipping water around the country is too expensive. So it's surprising that when you talk about dried, this isn't just dried for people to eat, you know, dried apple slices. There's a lot of dehydrated product goes in a lot of different products, power bars and granolas and all the rest. But a lot of it gets dehydrated and used, and every time it's treated with a metabisulfite. So there's chemical treatments in both the slices and the dehydrated products that Arctic apples wouldn't need. The other thing, you know, we target on is food service, because food service, we refer to that as, you know, the restaurants and cafeterias and prisons and all these people, and you see these big Cisco trucks running around all over the place dropping off, you know, the food going to the food service industry. And right now, apples really just aren't in that business. So, you know, if you looked at the apple packing shed, the number of pallets of apples going out to food service, it would represent less than 5% of sales, more like 1 or 2%. So there's the potential to give a 100% increase in apple consumption by putting apples into the food service market. It represents 50% of the meals are prepared outside the home through the food service industry. now you can be participating in the other 50% of the business. So it's a huge potential to try to get apples into food service. I come to Cornell today and talking to the science community, and I think there's no way I'm going to spend a presentation talking to you about the science, because I'm a bioresource engineer. I'm not a biotech specialist, but also I think that you guys know the science, and the science piece in this is the easy part. The hard part's the regulatory and the consumer acceptance and all that. So I'm going to focus more on that part. We like to say the science is relatively simple. We've taken a gene that causes problems in apples and we've turned it off. And how we did that, well, I think if you start saying much, it goes right over people's heads, and that's the end of it. Their eyes glaze over. So we keep it simple. In science terms, we basically induced an interfering RNA response to turn off the gene. Well, we often use this analogy is we have, if you have a railway track going from Los Angeles to New York, and consider that the DNA of the apple, what we've done is we've rerouted a piece of that track using the apple's own DNA. And so the idea being is that we've turned a gene off. We haven't introduced a piece of railway track from another plant species. The interesting thing about Arctic apples and turning off browning is that there's a benefit all the way along the value chain. The value chain being, your grower, packer, shipper, retailer, wholesaler, broker, all these different groups, processors. So, in our case, the grower gets finger bruising and bin rub and bag rub and small scuff marks and these sorts of things that downgrade and create cullage in the farm. And, if you can get rid of those and still deliver a market quality product, that's probably 5 or 10% for many varieties. Something like Macintosh, it could be higher. And then, in the packing shed, you have you're managing your packing regime to try to make sure you don't knock the fruit around in your warehouse too much. Or a great example is a Golden Delicious. You have to warm Goldens up to pack them so the skin's more elastic. And then you cool them down again, and doing that, you lose a pound pressure. So Arctic apples, you wouldn't have to do that. So, there's many benefits along the value chain. Clearly, people identify with the fresh cut side of things. You don't have to use an antioxidant, but there are also many other benefits. The shrink at retail, if you look at the display case in grocery store, you have major shrink happening on a lot of apple cultivars, and a lot of apples are tossed out or downgraded, sold off at low price. And we feel that we've demonstrated Arctic apples won't have that kind of shrink. So I'm going to next few slides are really going to deal with the consumer side of things. We've done an awful lot of work trying to understand the consumer attitudes towards a GM apple, because we keep getting told, apple, it's an iconic fruit, nobody's going to touch it, it goes back to the days of Adam and Eve and all the rest, and we just don't find that's the case. And hopefully some of the information I share with you here will kind of convince you the same. So we did an industry survey in 2007. And that's where we reached out to about 100 key grower, packer, shippers, brokers, retailers, and we then did a survey that lasted for about an hour or hour and 15 minutes with 45 of them that agreed to participate. We then did focus groups in Syracuse and in Seattle. So because our apples were in those two states, it was easier to keep them within the state. And then more recently in 2011, we wanted to have a quantitative survey work. So we did quantitative work in 2011, and then just in November of past year, we did some all intercept work. So in the I'm not going to really go into too much detail on the industry one, but we basically asked them where there's a non-browning apple of interest to your firm. And we found that about 75% of the people were largely those involved in fresh cut and food service. But what always came back was, the GM apple thing being the 800-pound gorilla that everybody was worried about. So, we were really interested in the product, but what about the consumer? And so then we moved over into the consumer, let's go talk to the consumer and find out what they say. And this was from the 2011 survey. So this is a quantitative data set, 1,000 and 1,200 participants, and just sharing a brief part of that is that we asked, are you interested in a non-browning apple? And the answer was, yes. And you can see, be extremely somewhat. So the dark gray is the, oh, pardon me, that band's not on here. So I'll get to that. So we asked them if they're interested in non-browning apple, and they said yes. And we said, well, did you know that there's one available and it was developed through genetic engineering? And so that genetic engineering piece was added to it. And the survey company said, whoa, you don't want to say that. That's, terrify people and nobody's going to want it. Well, you can see, so that's the darker gray shade. So these are people who are likely to buy an Arctic apple, and they know it's developed through genetic engineering. And you can see that in the neutral, somewhat likely, extremely likely, they're in that sort of 20 to 25% range. So then we said, and that's the post information, we didn't give them much more information. We said, well, there is an apple, it doesn't go brown, and it was developed through genetic engineering. And what we've done is we've taken the apple's own genes to turn off a gene in apple. So we added basically, not even a full sentence probably, not an English expert, but we added a little bit more information. There was no opportunity to look at photos or anything else, but we gave them a little more information, and you can see that we've got a lot back, because really you don't need to tell people much. I think the idea that we used the apple's own gene to turn off the browning was the message there, and a lot of people were quite good with that. So we were very happy to see that we've got a consumer base that's interested in buying an Arctic apple, and it combined the somewhat and extremely likely to buy, and those add up to 60 or 70% of the folks. And heck, we don't need everybody to like this. So that was, and I think if you visit our Arctic Apples website, there's a whole blog written on it, and there's more graphs and there's more details, but just trying to pull out some of the highlights of that. To me, that was a very encouraging set of data for us. So in the Mall Intercept study that we did last November, we did these, what that really represents is, 4 locations, so Chicago, Salem, North Carolina, Hayward, California, Independence. So that's sort of San Francisco, St. Louis, Chicago, and Raleigh. So a good distribution. And, the San Francisco suburb of Hayward, we were thinking, well, nobody's going to like that. That's GM's thing's not that. But what was very encouraging that the results were very consistent in all 4 locations, and the results have actually been very consistent in all the multiple years that we've done this work. But in the Mall Intercept, you had the chance to have fruit present. And so people were asked, are you willing to participate in a survey about apples? Yes. Okay, you come over to this room here. Now we've got Arctic apples and control fruit, and we sort of go into the story, and it takes about 15 or 20 minutes. And so they could see, over that 15 or 20 minutes, the control fruit turned very brown, and there's a picture of it here. And so we asked them a range of questions to get their attitudes towards the GM, genetic engineering and a non-browning apple. So first off is people will say, well, browning's not an issue. Well, clearly it is. 55% of the people consider browning to be a significant issue, and that's consistent with other survey work where we found that browning is an issue, and people would really like apples not to go brown. Very few people knew that Arctic apple or a non-browning apple was available. We always get the few who talk about, I use lemon juice, and all the stories they have. My grandmother did this, but in general, there's not much of education out there about some apples that brown less, and certainly about apples that don't brown. So there's a potential there for educating those people and creating more interest. So then, we asked in this Mall Intercept, they've got the apples in front of them, and you sort of say, what is your likelihood to purchase, and compared to other categories? So you're basically your control versus Arctic, and it worked out that 62%. So the likely and extremely likely worked out to be 62% of the folks that were interested. And really, the extremely unlikely, very consistently, actually it was probably less than normal, but you normally figure that there's 20% of the people out there that are not going to buy it. They eat organic, or they just not going to want to touch that whole GM food. And in this case, it was really less than that. And in fact, I'd argue that, that don't know crowd would be quite ripe for educating and getting a piece of those folks, and the neutral crowd as well. So with more education and time, we could build these folks' interests, and I think the data that we show here helps show that, because there was an unaided part of the surveys. We just asked them to make their general comments, and that as much as non-browning, we don't change how the apple goes mushy and that kind of stuff, but there's a lot of baggage associated with browning that goes along with it. They're talking about, they won't eat a brown apple because they think it'll be soft, don't like the look of it and all these sort of things. But certainly the waste, people keep relating to the fact that they know, their kids or themselves will throw out an apple, put it in the compost, and that's gone brown, and the fact that it didn't go brown will have less waste. And one of the presentations they gave last week, there was a grade 2 teacher in the audience, and she went and had a whole story of that day that school lunch program had passed out apples, and she said 97% or 92% or something had been thrown away and without even a bite taken. So it's the convenience and reducing waste is really what we're trying to do here. So then you ask about biotech, and they've seen the apples, they've looked at the non-browning apple, they've seen how it's not going brown compared to the control, and we said, well, do you think that genetic engineering is a good solution, is a good idea here, or a bad idea? And 67% said it was a good idea. Another 12 thought it was, didn't know, and then 20 thought it was a bad idea. So that was again very consistent with the other data we've had in the past. And when you ask the people who think it's a bad idea what it is, it's it's kind of this nebulous thing. Well, I'm not really sure, just don't like it. And I don't know what you're doing. I don't like messing around with my food and that sort of thing. But we do feel that experiencing it, seeing the apple, getting an opportunity to take one home, slice it up, eat it. A lot of those people that may not think it's a good idea today, once they realize what it's going to do for them in terms of convenience and other things, will be supporters of the product. Here's a picture taken right at the mall intercept. So you've got your conventional apples and Arctic apples, and this is in 20 minutes or 15 minutes even. So it was very dramatic. We really felt that in the sliced plate, every single person that did it wanted to eat one. There's even the bad idea 20% people. They all wanted to eat one. And that's been our case in every single instance we've had Arctic apples present, and I'm sorry today we don't have any. Just a little late in the season, mostly gone for us now. But whenever we have them there, people will say, I only eat organic, or I don't eat GM food. I know there's no way. By the time they've had a chance to look at them, in every instance, and we're talking about literally, hundreds and hundreds of people here, maybe thousands of people, they've always, every single time people will have eaten them. So again, that seeing's believing, and that sensory experience is something that's worth them looking at. So how does it, influence their likelihood to purchase? Again, we're back to the same thing, but it definitely, the non-browning increases their likelihood to purchase, and for a number of reasons, and eye appeal, crispness, texture. And it's non-browning. We haven't really changed crispness and texture, but it's that whole association of browning with texture and crispness that comes with it. And very consistently, the Arctic apples perform better. And we've actually done some sensory work with USDA and Food Quality Lab in Beltsville, and it's the same thing there exactly. And in fact, we've had to treat the controls with an antioxidant so they don't go brown, and so that we can get rid of that bias due to the eye appeal component. But now they have antioxidants, so they don't taste like apples anymore. So it's kind of a challenge. But just wanted to share this here. It's when certain statements that we had, people who thought made them more likely to buy or supported the statement. The idea that the fruit could be cut and stored in the fridge for several days. Well, clearly that's very convenient. We've actually stored some in our fridge in our own home. Sliced them and put them in a sandwich bag and put them in the fridge. No fancy treatments whatsoever. And my son and I ate them 5 weeks later, and And that's unusual. Usually the bacteria and fungi will get them before then, but I guess maybe the fridge was a little cold enough that we didn't get that kind of pressure. But and they were white. It suberized a little bit. The cells had dried some, but they still the flavor profile was excellent. And we're really talking about people being able to do this home for a few days, a week or something. But that level of convenience, slicing an apple at breakfast. If you didn't eat all the slices, you have the rest at lunch or coffee time or at supper or the next day at breakfast. These sorts of things. One of the things is you see higher levels of health-promoting nutrients. I often get asked, why is that in there? And an interesting consequence of turning polyphenol oxidase off is the preservation of substrate. And so, your polyphenols and your vitamin C are part of are substrates of the Brownian reaction, and you probably know this better than I do. But what we get is enhanced levels, higher levels of vitamin C and polyphenols, and higher ORAC or oxidation, reaction levels, and to the point where it's been a bit of an issue with FDA. And it's not that an Arctic apple has higher levels of vitamin C; it just hangs onto them better. And vitamin C is at low levels in apple already, and as an apple sits in storage, you get some cell wall breakdown. And what we're finding is that Arctic apples have about 20% higher levels of vitamin C in the whole apple form after 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks of storage. And when it's sliced and sits out for 24 hours, it's much higher. The vitamin C in a control is about a half of an Arctic apple. So there is slight benefit there. It's not something that we target, but it is something we've had to deal with from a regulatory point of view. So that a main target for us are the fresh gut processors. We put more apples into food service, give a more natural apple flavor to the apple without the antioxidant present. Right now, an antioxidant, they use calcium ascorbate's a common product. Ascorbic acid combined with other things, but that calcium component seems to be popular or is needed to really keep it in good condition. But the antioxidant is about the same value as the apples. It can be 35 to 40% of the cost of making a fresh cut apple slice. I hear lower numbers, I hear higher numbers, but the other side of that too is the amount of slices that you've treated and then you throw out as they go through a grading and culling part of it. So, the whole fact that, another thing you have, I've got a laser deal here, is that when you make a fresh cut apple slice, this boundary layer right between the skin and the flesh, you often will get a little brown line because the knife, as it dulls, will create deformation before it slices. And, but the antioxidant won't penetrate that. And so then they get out to retail and it's 7 days old and it starts to show, and the consumer sees that, and then those bags end up getting tossed out. And the fresh cut guys have a lot of challenges, and then you plunk an Arctic apple down on their desk and say, well, try one of these, and just that whole thing goes away. And it's really quite remarkable. We've done that with a company called Treetop in Washington State. They had a 5-year project where they worked on trying to get rid of metabisulfates in their dehydrated product. They make a lot of dehydrated apple slices. And we just dropped an Arctic Granny and Arctic Gate and an Arctic Golden onto the box of each, and the solution was there. They don't need them anymore. They can slice them and dehydrate them, cube them, wedge them, do whatever they want without any treatments. And so then you can have a product that you can say contains no preservatives, which is a big thing, very big thing. So more apples in more places, that's our goal. We asked the question if people were, over 2/3 of consumers are more likely to purchase a GE apple untreated versus a treated apple. So we'll really ask the question is to measure that balance between, putting an antioxidant or a chemical treatment, a metabisulfite on the product versus using a biotech solution to get rid of the problem. So, chemicals or biotech, that's the thing. And here, 2/3 said that they use genetic engineering to get rid of the chemicals. So, we think that that's a positive, very positive step. So where are we on our path to market? Sarah mentioned a little update here. The regulatory process, is the challenge here, not the science. It's a pretty huge effort, and it's only getting more arduous as we get more, consumer groups working against the Center for Food Safety and people like that. There'll be a timeline in the next slide, but so essentially in the U.S. we have USDA and FDA. Because we're not changing, we're not trying to make it disease resistant or pest resistant, we don't have to work with EPA. But they do get to share the data, they get to see what we have. And then in Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Health Canada. Canada's a little different, same data, different process. In Canada, we regulate with plants with novel traits. So in Canada, we regulate the product. In the US, you regulate the process. Now, to address the questions, you more or less need the same data set, but you need to speak to them differently. So, a company of 7, you got a picture, here we are, 7 people doing the science, doing the regulatory data package, out there doing the consumer messaging, and we're trying to generate these massive regulatory documents for all these different agencies, and they all seem to want different stuff. And it's like, man, can't you guys just simplify this, make one document for everybody? So they were good. They recognize small companies. They are more accommodating, but it was a lot of work. And so we did USDA APHIS first, and that was the environmental assessment stuff. And then we did FDA, which is the food and feed safety. And then we took that material and we repackaged it for these 2 agencies, the CFIA and Health Canada, because they needed 3 documents all submitted at the same time. The other way, we could break it out one at a time. So it was kind of, trying to manage the workload. So here it is in a timeline. So we're founded in 1996. 1997, July, we started our lab activities. It took us 9 months to figure out where the money was going to come from and how we had to go get a license for the technology from CSIRO in Australia. So in 2002, we basically had proof of concept. We built 3 different vectors, Gen 1, Gen 2, Gen 3 vectors. Gen 1 didn't work. The licensed technology we got from CSIRO focused on turning off one dominant PPO isozyme. It would cross-react with the others, and you get a non-browning trait. It didn't work on apple. There's a lot of PPO isozymes, and there's no dominant one, and there's 4 different families and 8 different isozymes. So we ended up in the proof of, in 2002, after trying different techniques, we had to silence 4 different isozymes of PPO to get what we wanted. So, 4, basically knocking out 4 genes at once. We got trees into our field trial in Washington State in 2003. We got trees into a field trial here in New York State in 2005. We submitted a regulatory document in 2010, and people say, well, what did you do for those 5 years? I'd sure like to know what we did for those 5 years, but I don't know. We waited for the apples to grow. We did other stuff. We tried marker-free transformations from Simplot. We tried some Cornell technology, thinking, having a marker in this product was not where we wanted to grow. None of that stuff seemed to work. Meanwhile, the trees had settled down. We're producing fruit. First couple years in an orchard, you get plump, nitrogen-rich fruit, and it's not really what you want to use for regulatory data. We collected data basically from 2003 until today, but by the time sort of 2005 came along, 2006, we said, okay, we're going to do this. We spent 4 years collecting the data, getting the data, and doing the statistics and building. And then in 2009, we focused on putting that whole thing together. Spent a year doing the regulatory document, and then May 2010 we submitted it. So it just took that long. So then we submitted FDA in May, a year later, and the Canadian agencies in December of that same year as FDA, 2011. Well, just to speak to where we are today, we had really hoped we'd be done by now. We were told many times we'd be done by now. We were told by the FDA we'd be done Christmas 2012. Today we're still not done. We're back looking at the vitamin C data. I'll just share this with you. The vitamin C data, they said, well, we don't like it. You're going to have to label it. You're going to have to label it this product has higher levels of vitamin C. And we said, well, that's a great label. We'll take it. But it's not truthful. How can we put a label on there that's not accurate? And the other guys in the FDA group were saying, we agree, we can't have that label on there. It doesn't make sense. And so, we seem to go back and forth and back and forth. And finally, a few weeks ago, we sort of went in there and with the heavy artillery, I guess, and we said, look, guys, this has just got to stop. We're just going in circles here. And we showed them a new set of vitamin C data saying, well, this is what it is. And we had Arctic apples where we had, 2 weeks old, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks, 14. We had a whole series of them. We showed vitamin C compared to controls. We overwhelmed them with data saying, look, and it's consistently 20% higher, but not if you take right off the tree, they were the same. It's just as they break down, we're preserving it. It's not higher levels, and so we think we're done. Anyway, we'll know. With APHIS, the second public comment period closed on January the 30th. It was kind of a disappointment. It was supposed to close on the 9th of December, and then they extended it to the 16th of December. And then right before Christmas, my Christmas present was getting a call from APHIS saying, oh, we're going to reopen your public comment period, which really wasn't very good news. It wasn't what I was looking for. And it's now going to close at the end of January. Finally, it did close, didn't reopen again. So that's, it's now closed, and we're about 60 days from approval, apparently. So that's huge. 60 days, we think in both FDA and APHIS, that 60-day to 90-day time frame is where we're at to approval, which means that this spring, in April, May of this year, we could plant Arctic apples completely unencumbered. I mean, they could be treated like any other apple cultivar, which is what we need because we have a whole ton of trees in our nursery right now that are scheduled to go out to folks who are planning on planting them, and it would be a bit of a mess if that didn't happen. So we hope that's all going to work out. In Canada, we've finished their science review in Canada. They don't have a public comment period, which they think is a great thing for them. We're, I think we're maybe slightly longer. The early part of the second quarter, certainly by June of this year, we'll be done in Canada. So we don't plan on planting Arctic apples outside, unencumbered, deregulated this year. But we may keep some, like we have a lot in our greenhouse, and if we think we're close, we may keep some in Canada. Particularly the difference you see in Canada, when we get deregulated, in Canada it will be for any cultivar, any Arctic apple cultivar. In the US it's by process, and every event has to go through the process. In Canada it's by product, but if you don't change the vector, it's by vector species combination. So in terms of our Gen 3 vector and Mollis domestica, once we have the first two through, all the rest go through or don't need to go through the regulatory process. So that means we can take our Fujis and Galas and put them outside. And so we're hoping if we looks promising, we'll keep some Fujis and Galas in Canada to put them outside. So we are commercial, sort of pre-commercialization phase at this point. We had some trees planted under license in 2012. We have about 10 different growers planting them out this spring. We're working with growers throughout North America, so both Canada and the United States. We do have quantities of fruit, trees going in the ground and trees that have been in the ground, and so there will be fruit by 2015. We expect, probably be 20 to 50, 40 bins or something like that of fruit. And that'll disappear in a heartbeat, going to different food service tests and trials. The challenge we have with food service is that some of the bigger folks that are interested in the product, they need 10,000 pounds a week. And it's hard to go from when you have nothing to 10,000 pounds. It just takes a while. So we have made the decision to actually establish our own orchards as a company, our own orchards probably, and one in Canada and the US, and so we can have fruit that we can put out to people rather than the commercial growers that we're working with, because they all have their own places they want to use the fruit. So we've made that decision. But as we go forward, we're sort of finalizing that marketing strategy. Licensing and branding comes up a lot. The labeling issue. There's been lots of states with labeling referendums and stuff, and this is what it'll say. People say, "Are you going to label it?" We're going to say yes. What are you going to label it? We're not putting a GE with a line through it. We're not. We're going to label it what it is. We're building a brand here, or our goal is our Arctic Apple brand, and so it would say Arctic Gala, Arctic Fuji, Arctic Golden, Arctic Granny. It'll also have the price lookup code on it because that's compulsory. But you know, you don't have a lot of room on the sticker, but at the point of sale in the retail store, there will be point of sale promotion materials, probably a QR, for example, that will take them to our website, specific consumer page on the website that'll talk, you know, and we're very transparent. We don't try to hide what we're doing. This is a genetically engineered product. And I think with the media attention we've had, most people who buy an Arctic apple will know that. If they don't, the information will be there at the store to tell them that. Our messaging is really simple. You know, this is our Arctic apple website. If you haven't visited it, I encourage you to go take a look at it. It's been very well received. It's a very consumer-oriented fruit website. We also have a corporate, Okanagan specialty fruit website that's maybe a little bit more on the product development side and corporate side of things. But really our message is Arctic apples are just like other apples until the fruit is bruised, bitten, or cut. So it looks the same, tastes the same, and grows the same. And it's not until you bruise it or something bad happens to it, or cut it or whatever. The one thing I'll make is that a lot of people say, well, you can't tell when the apple's gone bad. It's actually the reverse is true now. When an Arctic apple goes brown, it's because you've got pathogens, you've got bacteria and fungi in there driving a browning reaction. So it's all of that bad stuff still happens. It's not we're going to hide it. If it's a significant bruise, you've got the water marking and you've got other issues that happen there. Today's modern packing shed equipment will identify that through the optic cameras that review the fruit, and it'll get kicked out. We've done tests on the fruit. So really, we're talking about getting rid of those superficial blemishes and things that really a lot of fruit gets culled around. I think we've gone a little. Where are we going next? Yeah, we've got a product pipeline, of course, but we're very, very focused. We get beaten over the head by our board of directors to stay focused. And so the Arctic apple program is our dominant effort, but we have proof of concept in apple scab, fire blight, and storage scald. We're currently working on a new technology platform utilizing site-directed mutagenesis. So there's tremendous potential looking down the road to develop new traits in tree fruits without it being a GMO, or falling into that gray area of we don't know what to call it now. So that's about the science, and that's probably where you'd be interested to talk to us about that. But we do see great scope for advancements that are made. We have done whole genome sequencing of both events that are going through regulatory. We've mapped all of the inserts. We now have, the Apple Genome Project had, I think, about 85% reference library. In our own company now we have about 93% of the library reference. So, we think that now that we have that information, we can do a lot more stuff, and we're looking forward to that date. But first we got to get the Arctic apple into the marketplace. So that's it. And there's our websites, and if you are interested, I have a few infographics that you may want to put up on the wall or take to your school class or something if you're invited someday. But there's a few here if you'd like. So I think there's time for a few questions.